Welcome back to SAMMcast, the podcast by the Students' Association of Management and Marketing at the University of Melbourne. We aim to be the go-to space for all things considered in the world of management and marketing and how it links to you, your uni life, and future career. Our co-hosts today are myself, Gabrielle, and Helen. In this episode, we will delve into the management major. It might look confusing at first, but today we'll be breaking it down for you so that it's easy to understand. In 2021, there have been a few key changes to the major, which we will discuss. Then, we'll have a look at how the major will be structured. Following this, we'll go through some of the core subjects you'll be taking, including principles of management, organizational behavior, and business judgment. Joining us today are a few key members of the academic staff here at the University of Melbourne to give you some insight into how your management major might look. So we thought it would be great to start off by having Andre come in to talk to us about what exactly has changed and how it will affect you. So Andre, could you please introduce yourself?
My name's Andre Sammartino. I'm an associate professor in the Department of Management and Marketing, and I'm the deputy head responsible for teaching and learning. So yeah, I have to guide these things through our processes.
Yeah, fabulous. So I guess we're all curious, what exactly has changed to the management major?
Yeah, so it's pretty exciting. We've made the most changes we've made in a long time to the management major, and I guess just purely in a numbers sense, we've actually reduced the number of subjects on offer, but in doing so, we've actually changed almost all of them. And they're pretty radical changes from our perspective. We've narrowed down the number of subjects in second year to 5, in third year to 9. What was behind it was very much about taking a more student-centric perspective, much more from the perspective of the specific tasks and contexts in which students would soon be encountering in workplaces. So how would they interact with the managerial issues that we research and talk about all the time? We want students to walk out from the major well-armed to understand what it means to work inside an organisation, what it means to build a career, what it means to manage others, what it means to manage processes and understand the ecosystems they're interacting with. And what it meant for us was breaking down a lot of the silos about how we think about things as teachers. We tend to be experts in one small domain. Right. So we tend to teach that domain as a whole subject. And what we've done is, in fact, sort of pull that apart and say, well, no, what are the tasks or what are the challenges a student encounters and we encounter when we manage? And then how would you deal with those problems? So many of the subjects are now going to be team taught. So there'll be people coming in with different perspectives on how you deal with a particular issue from our own different sets of skills and tools that we bring to the system. So taking one I know reasonably well, I come from the international business field. We used to have a subject in second year called Business and the Global Economy. And that was very much about what does the global business scene looks like and what are the various theories about how multinational firms operate. And what we've done is actually taken that and merged it with a third year subject, which was an international HRM subject, specifically a subject that looked at the HRM issues that multinationals face. So what we've done is actually turn that around and say, well, actually, what are we talking about? We're talking about managing globally. So what are the challenges firms face globally? What are the challenges teams face globally? What are the challenges individuals face globally? And what are the various institutional contexts for that? And then what tools do we have? So framing the problems and then coming at them with tools. And that's sort of what we've done again and again across all the subjects.
Yeah.
And just one last one, I guess, for those students who are coming in first year, one of the things we really changed is principles of management, which is our first year subject, which quite a few hundred students do every semester. We've made that very explicit now in terms of domains and sort of said there are really 4 domains that you will be dealing with in our major if you choose to do the major. So managing the self, so managing your own career, your motivations, your purpose, your creativity. They're all things you manage of yourself. Then we think about managing others, so teams, conflict, cross-cultural communication, and human resource management, managing other people. And then managing organizations. And that's pursuit of strategy, understanding structures, understanding processes. Then it's also entrepreneurship. It's creating organizations. So what does that involve? And then managing ecosystems and managing in ecosystems. So what's a supply chain? What does it mean to interact with it? What's the global business scene? What are institutions? What's social purpose mean in a global sense? So these are all the things we're sort of tackling with. So there you go.
That's really interesting because I did take international HR and then principles of management, of course. So it's interesting hearing how you guys are adding a lot more to these subjects, maybe getting more of a comprehensive, real world look at things.
That's our hope. Yeah.
Yeah, it sounds really great to me. The next thing we sort of want to talk about, so there's probably a lot of first years listening to this, and for those considering doing a management major later on down the track, it can probably look a bit confusing, like it's coming into university from high school. So I guess we'd be really interested in hearing how exactly the management major at the University of Melbourne is structured.
Yeah, look, it's not obvious. And again, just quickly, that's one of the things we've actually tried to fix. We've changed the subject titles so they're almost all of them now start with the word managing. So at least it's obvious you're doing a managing major, management major. The structure is very much a funnel, an upside down funnel, if you will, or a pyramid.
Yeah.
If you think about first year being at the top, you might do one subject, which is principles, and that's very much about just introducing you to the bits and pieces across the major. In second year, it's very much about getting the foundational concepts in place. For students in our major, it's organisational behaviour, which is compulsory in the BCom, is very much about understanding organisations. So you get a sense of what organisations are, what are the major elements inside there. And then when you get to third year, you'll find the more specialised domains. So things like sustainability, things like entrepreneurship, where you can really dive deeply into those subjects. And to secure the major is actually relatively straightforward. It's a good rule of thumb to remember. You just need to finish 3 third-year subjects in the domain. In the management major and also in the marketing major, there is a capstone requirement. There is a compulsory third-year subject. Now, it is the same subject for both management and marketing, which has some efficiency to it. And that sort of ties it all together. And we might talk a little bit more about that as well.
Yeah, definitely. I guess the other thing we were curious about, you can satisfy your quantitative requirement by taking, like, for example, business decision analysis. Is that something many students do? And I guess what would be the benefits of that if you are interested in pursuing management?
Oh, look, it's a growing subject.
Yeah.
Thankfully, in many ways, because it only runs once a year, it doesn't quite get as many students as it could. It gets a few hundred students do it. Look, the idea of both business decision analysis, and we also have a marketing research subject, the idea behind those is to look at empirical issues, data-based issues that are specific to the domains, and think about the analytical tools that are specific to those domains as well. So we're not focused on giving you the latest whiz-bang maths or econometrics, but rather we're interested in looking at the real problems that organisations face and thinking about how they can address those quantitatively. So in business decision analysis, it's very much about things like how do firms optimise resource utilisation? So how do they solve for pretty complex problems, for example, in the supply chain, understanding how you can get the inputs at the right time, et cetera, understanding the ideal configuration of your production network, et cetera. And we focused on resolving those issues. So now, don't get me wrong, the maths is still complex.
Yeah.
I personally struggle with the maths. It's been a while. And the solutions are not obvious, but it's really about arming students with the tools that you are most likely to use in the workplace, and tools that are still likely to make a splash in the workplace because not everyone has them. We are teaching pretty new approaches to things, but they're very focused on the context in which you would use them.
So I guess now we'll have Andre maybe talk to us a bit about what this capstone subject is that we keep talking about, business judgment. This is a compulsory subject for all students undertaking either the marketing or management major. So maybe you could give us like a bit of an overview of what exactly you're learning and like subject content.
So a capstone subject, just to get a sense of what I mean by a capstone subject, this is a terminology that gets used educationally, and most programs in the university have a capstone. And when you get into our master's programs, for example, there's a requirement that there be one. They can do various things, but in this instance, business judgment is what we call an integrative capstone. So the idea is that it's an opportunity for students to synthesize tools and concepts from across their study. In this instance, from across the majors and the BCom more generally. So we're aware that students will have done the past 2 years of the BCom as well. So we're aware of what tools come from those domains. And in business judgment, it's very much about focusing students' attention on solving problems, not in the sense of problems that have a known solution, but rather making judgments about key issues. So whether those issues are a marketing choice, so what product should we launch, or what price should we engage in, or where should we place this product, or how should we change a product, or a management decision about opening up new markets or changing a work structure, changing an organisational structure. So any one of those sorts of decisions. So the subject is very much thinking about what tools do you need and what tools do you already have? Because there's a danger in both of our majors. You're building up this arsenal, but you're not really sure what they're all for. So it's saying, well, why have we got all these tools? What do we use a 5 forces framework for? What's it really there for? So the subject reminds students of the tools because students won't have done every subject. So we remind students of lots of the tools. And we do introduce some decision-making scaffolding. So thinking about decision steps and thinking about how do you critically assess what you're doing as you go. And the aim really, in terms of what we aim to deliver alongside the sort of 2 consulting subjects that we also run from our department, is that these are real dress rehearsals for making decisions out there in the real world.
A lot of people talk about like the sort of business simulation. I guess, is this something you should be holding off on taking into like your last semester? Like, do you need to be quite prepared for this?
Great question. Yes, please do it in your last semester. Look, it's I won't get into the complexity of how the university enrollment systems work and how hard it is to put point requirements on subjects. But yes, anyone who enrolls in the subject will find they get frequent emails from me before semester starts saying, please do this in your final semester. Look, our experience already, having run it for a couple of years, is students perform much better in their final semester because obviously they come best armed to tackle any of the problems and you get the sort of most out of it. Now, your question was, what's the simulation? I can tell you about this. So we use a simulation and it's not quite half the assessment, but it's sort of half of the work, if you will, for the subject, which is a business strategy simulation. So you and a team are trying to build competitive advantages over rival teams through your product design, through your marketing efforts, through your production scheduling, your pricing, your financing, etc. And very much captures the integrative aspect of the decisions you will be making in the real world, because they're very interrelated decisions and there are big trade-offs involved in making one decision versus another. And there's high levels of uncertainty created by the competitive environment. So you're competing against 5 other firms. You start out identical and you evolve away from each other because of your decisions. We run 6 years of competition. So each set of decisions is a year. And so students get a strong sense of the competitive dynamics and the learning process and the flow-on effects from decisions and how decision-making changes over time as you make the same decisions again and again. And that in itself is an important thing to understand, that there's both huge learning gains, but also some bias issues that emerge as you try and make the same decision again and again.
Yeah, truly.
Students complain that it's a lot of work, but students usually throw themselves into it and learn a great deal from it.
Yeah, no, a lot of my friends were saying it was probably the most enjoyable part of the subject, just getting like that real world exposure, I guess. So it's great to hear from you, the sort of skills that you're gaining from it. Did I miss any important aspects of business judgment that I maybe didn't cover with my questions?
Probably, I guess, the other side of it. So I wouldn't want students to think we just do the simulation. So we do the simulation first. In the second half of the semester, we sort of flip that around quite a lot, and the same teams then get involved in thinking about real life decisions, real life solutions for firms. So we've done it different ways from semester to semester, and I must admit we haven't yet decided what we're doing for 2021. We take it, well, I can tell you we do it fairly last minute, to the extent that both in semester 1, 2020, the students did it on COVID. Not surprising. How are various industries going to deal with this? We thought maybe the second semester we wouldn't be doing COVID, but I guess we did again. So hopefully we'll do something a little bit less pandemic related, but that's very much designed around much more creativity, much more of a choose your own adventure scenario where teams can really go off and explore. And we allow students to be much more specialized as well. So if a team is really keen on doing a marketing solution, then we're really happy to see that. If they're really interested in doing a supply chain solution, they can go and do that, or a human resource management. So yeah, that's the other side of it.
Yeah, that's something I hadn't even thought of, but it's a good point.
Excellent. Great.
Fabulous. Well, thank you so much, Andre. We really appreciate you coming on the podcast, taking your time of the day to do that. The insights were fantastic, so thank you so much. I'm looking forward to my experiences with business judgment in the future.
No worries, Gabrielle. It's been a pleasure.
As a first-year student, often one of the first management subjects that you will take is Principles of Management, which will provide you with a good overview of the various management concepts you'll be interacting with down the track. If you have any interest in management as a major, often this will be your first foray into the field. Luckily, we have Daniel here today to tell us a bit more about the subject. Hello, and can you introduce yourself a little bit to our listeners?
Yeah, thanks, Helen. My name's Danny Sampson, and I'm Professor of Management. I've been at the university for a long time now as a Professor of Management, and I've been teaching this subject, Principles of Management, on and off for quite some years as well. So I know it pretty well.
Great. So, with your insider knowledge, can you give us a bit of an overview about the subject and what type of concepts that students can expect to learn about?
Yes, of course. So for any person who's going to be graduating from our university, they're going to be getting a job in an organisation. And the first thing to note about organisations, whether they're large or whether they're small, is that that organisation is going to have managers. It's got to be managed. And an old way of thinking about managing organisations that we used to use was that they have to be planned, that we call it PLOC, planning, leading, organising, and then controlling the operations of the
hmm
organisation. And that's the job that's done by managers. And an additional really important point is that very many of our graduates, they might graduate in something where they've majored in other than management, such as from within our faculty, that would be accounting or finance or economics or marketing or a couple of other things, but those will be some of the main ones. But in their careers, it's very likely that they'll later on become professional managers. And even if they don't, they'll have to work with managers and they'll have to manage. So, using manage as a verb there. So, what's involved, what this subject does is it tells you what's involved in the act of managing, and what are the elements of management, how to do it well, how to recognize when it's being done well, not so well. And it's actually not a trivial subject. There's lots of important elements of it that comprise the topics in the subject.
I think most of the common students in the faculty have a first taste of management from organisational behaviour, OB. Is that subject quite similar to principles of management, or how is it different?
They definitely overlap because OB is all about human behaviour in organisations. And there's no question that that's an important part of the broader aspects of management. But management is also about many other things that we cover in this Principles of Management subject. The Principles of Management subject also, I should tell you, that the Principles of Management subject is designed and offered as a first year subject, whereas organisation behaviour is very often done as a second year subject.
Yeah.
Principles of Management is much broader in its coverage. For example, it also includes not just what I'll call the behavioural topics like motivation and leadership and teamwork, but we also include things like ethics and social responsibility, planning and goal setting, business strategy, designing an organisation structure, innovation, quality management, and value chain management. So you can see that many of those topics that I just mentioned are beyond and broader than just the behavioural side. May I importantly say that the behavioural aspects of what a manager does are incredibly important. Some could argue the most important thing in managing is managing the behaviour and the performance of people. But there's a lot of other aspects too.
And so, for students who are interested in taking principles of management, what kind of assignments and assessments can they be expected to do in the subject?
There are 3 pieces of assessed work, usually in about week 5. We have the first essay, it's an individual essay, and it's an essay in which we ask them to review and comment on their approach and what they've learnt about management just in the first 3 or 4 weeks. We like to have an assignment early so as we can give feedback also early. And students get that by about week 6 or 7. And that's just an individual assignment, which usually, I mean, the question changes every year, but it's usually a question about the nature of management, the aspects of management, the history and the evolution of the field of management, and what comprises what I like to call sometimes best practices in management. In other words, what works
hmm
in terms of management. The second piece of assessment, that is a group piece of assessment, is a slightly longer and more detailed essay. I think it's due in about week 10 or so. That's where it has been. And that's a group piece. Usually, last few years, we give them a case study. The last year, we used a case study of a finance based organisation called AMP, In Australia, the year before, I think we've used companies like Apple, and we give you a short case study. We give the students a short case study, and they analyse aspects of the topics that I've just been talking about in management to see which ones have been done well, which ones not so well, and they write an essay there. And then there's a final exam, involves some short essay type answers to essay questions.
And further to that, what type of activities are usually held in tutorials?
Yeah, so of course, like all of the undergraduate subjects, there's a 2-hour lecture and every week and a 1-hour tutorial. And in the tutorial, firstly, we review the topic and we discuss what the core elements of the topic are. And then we usually do interactive exercises. So we might break up a tutorial group, so let's say roughly 20 people, into 5 groups of 4, roughly, and then give them something to chew on and discuss, and may I say debate about maybe an ethical dilemma, for example, or it could be something to do with what should be the future strategy of a company if we're doing the strategy topic. And we give them some time to do that interactive work and then to report back and have a discussion. May I say that this year, the feedback on the tutorials was extremely positive. And that was even doing them, in remote circumstances on Zoom. Yeah. The students really liked the tutorials.
That's great. And you talked about a little bit before, but how do you think the skills that students will learn from this subject later inform their postgrad working life and their later studies in management?
If they're going to do further study in management, let me answer that bit first, then they're going to go into some of the topics that I've mentioned, because we cover a great breadth of management topics in this subject, and the students will go into more detail. So they might decide that they want to specialise, for example, in studying and becoming a leader. Well, we cover leadership fundamentals in this subject, and then they can decide, using our subject, they can decide which of the 10 or so major topics that we cover they want to go into. So they get a bit of a look at all of them. In fact, they get an introduction to all of them, and then they can decide, based on knowing what each of those topics is, where they want to specialise. In terms of, and 2 examples that are very different topics would be leadership, that I just mentioned, and the other one would be value chain and supply chain management for people who want to take on operations management and supply chain or procurement kinds of roles. And we give introductions in our subject to all of those different topics. So we cover the breadth, and then later students can go into the depth. And in respect of life as a professional manager, I happen to spend my time a lot in the world of professional management, in my consulting work and also in my applied research work, and also I worked in industry before I came to the university. Let me say that everybody that works in any organisation needs to know about all of the topics that are in these subjects, because they will come across all of the issues that we cover in a practical setting and need to know what to do.
Mm-hmm. Our final question is if you have any insider tips on how to do well on this subject and how to really succeed in principles of management.
Yes, I do. Really, in summary, it's make sure that you come to lectures, participate in the tutorials, and read that 1 chapter a week so that you're up on all of the topics. And that gives the students everything they need to do the assignments and also the knowledge they need to do the exam questions.
Great. Thank you so much. It was great having you here as a professor of so many years, but thank you so much for your insight today.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Organisational behaviour is a management subject offered at the second-year level that explores group dynamics, motivation and communication within an organisational environment. It is a compulsory subject for all Bachelor of Commerce students and is offered all year round. Today we are lucky to have Dr. Victoria Roberts, a lecturer of Management and Marketing at UniMelb, to tell us more about this subject. Thank you so much for joining us. Can you please tell us a little bit about yourself?
Well, thanks very much for having me. I am a lecturer in the Department of Management and Marketing, and the subject that I've been focused on since I joined the department is organisational behaviour. And it's a fantastic subject and one that I've really enjoyed being a part of. We have a great group of tutors and academics working in the subject, and I'm really happy to be on the podcast and talking about it.
Great, thank you so much. Now diving into the subject of organisational behaviour, can you give us a little bit of an overview of the subject for those who might not know much about it?
You may know that organisational behaviour is a compulsory subject in the Bachelor of Commerce. And the reason for that is, first of all, organisations are a defining feature of our world, and that all of us either work currently or will work in an organisational context. Whether or not you choose to be an actuary, an economist, an accountant, as you progress in that organisation and you get more responsibility, we know that it's inevitable that you will become a manager of people and resources. And so we feel that organisational behaviour will be a really important and useful preparation for you as you take on those roles. So organisational behaviour is a study of how individuals and groups work within an organisational context. The subject provides a set of conceptual tools based on evidence to help us to work effectively within organisations and to be able to work effectively in groups as well. We teach the subject in two halves. We have a micro section of the course, which focuses on the individual within an organisation. So some of the topics, how we perceive information, how our attitudes affect our behaviours, how our motivation works, how we resolve conflict. And then we move on to what we call the macro section of the course. And that really views the organisation as a holistic social structure. So we look at, if you like, this from a top-down perspective, things like how the culture of the organisation works, how communication works, how ethics works, how we can, for example, set up ethical or unethical systems and processes, and how the strategy and the structure of the organisation works.
And can you give us a little bit of an insight into the type of assessments students can expect to go through?
We break down the assessments into different components. Importantly, we have three elements of the educational model in organisational behaviour. First of all, you have the lecture, then you have an online tutorial and an in-class tutorial. The purpose of those tutorials, both online and face-to-face, is to be able to start to put into practice some of the concepts and theories and to be able to apply them to some business cases and business problems. So we assess students on the basis of their participation in the online and in-class tutorial. That is 10% of the final assessment mark. We also include one individual assignment, which is the individual comes early in the semester. You'll have to complete that by week 4. And that is usually short answer or an essay format assessment that requires you to apply, as I mentioned, some of those micro theories, those that focus on the individual level of analysis, to a small case study. That's 10%. We then have a group assessment, and that is due in week 9 of the semester. You'll form groups very early on in week 3, and together you'll work to analyse a more substantial case where you'll have to apply some of the macro topics within organisational behaviour. The macro topics relate to those that look at more the systems and structures within an organisation. So that is, for example, the culture, the communication style, the strategy of an organisation. Just finally, we've obviously got the exam, and that's a hurdle requirement. So you have to pass the exam in order to pass the subject. And that is broken down into 2 different components. One, we have a reflection on your team experience. And in that assessment, you're required to apply some of the micro topics that you learnt in the first half of this semester. And then you have a 3-part analysis of one of the key OB cases you've studied during the course of the semester. And that is, again, focused on the macro component of the course.
And just finally, can you give us any insider tips on how to do well in this subject?
Well, I think, first of all, have an open mind. I think that sometimes there's myths around management that it's easy or it's just common sense. But in fact, this discipline is based on a long history of research in political science and psychology, in anthropology even, in sociology. And we as a discipline have accumulated a lot of evidence about what works. So I think keeping an open mind is the first thing. The second thing, I think, is enjoy meeting your peers and working in a group. I think that is probably one of the most challenging part of it. And being ready to be present, being ready to communicate, being ready to address issues early on. I think that they're key things, and use the resources you've got. We've got the most fantastic group of tutors, and they love teaching organisational behaviour. And so they're there for you, as well as, of course, the academics. And yeah, I think they're the two key parts.
Well, that's all the questions we had today. Thank you so much for your insight into organisational behaviour and for being here today.
Thank you, Helen. Pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you all so much for listening to this episode of SAMMcast. Stay tuned for future episodes where we delve into other interesting topics in the world of marketing and management. And thank you again to our guests for being here.